24. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am the Messiah,' and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. But see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains."
Welcome back to the 4th episode of The Journey Back. We're really happy that you've been joining us as we've been talking about things that are on our heart from week to week, and I'm glad you've been joining in on our discussion. And you just listened to that passage out of Matthew chapter 24, where the disciples asked Jesus, what are going to be the signs of the end times? And I really remember that passage a lot from my, early days as a Christian, and how I was riveted with end times discussion and end times teaching. For me, it was in the early 80s, and that really captured me. And I think a lot of people got saved as a result of, fear of those, end times lessons.
Yeah, they got the hell scared
the hell out of them.
Yeah, I mean, it was all the scary movies. Remember the scary movies? Yeah.
Oh, they were horrible.
And Hal Lindsey's book was scary. I mean, it just said the whole world was, about to burn, but never mind, Christians are going to be raptured, and we'll all be taken away and up to be with Jesus and leave it all behind. And I mean, there was all this stuff, but it was like, at the time, we were coming out of the 60s and 70s where the world was unraveling, not like it is today, but it was. For us, it was. I mean, we were scared to death of where things were going. And this was kind of answering our question, what's going to happen to us?
It really did. And it also kind of relieved us, or it assuaged our fear, because at that time we had the teaching of the rapture, and the teaching was that all of that was going to happen. Jesus was going to take the believers out before all the really bad stuff happened. So you could watch the scary end times movie and then be comforted in the hope that you would be taken away, and you didn't have to, endure any of that. And the one thing, as I've, grown as a Christian, I've thought, when did God ever do that to believers? I don't recall a time in history when he's taken them out of any type of a suffering situation because it got too bad. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've not seen it.
No, and he said, in this world, there is going to be tribulation, but fear not, I'm with you. I mean, he's calling.
Right.
What I see is that he's calling his church into the midst of the crisis, not to run from it or not to be taken away from it, and but to be on the front lines of it, because that's when the gospel is most powerfully preached.
Right. And one of the things that Jesus says in this passage is, but see to it that you're not alarmed. So he gives us clear warnings as to what's going to happen, but I still feel like we miss it a lot of times. We somehow miss the signs, even though, there's more talk right now than there has ever been about the end times and Jesus coming back. But I still think people are missing the point of his warnings. They're like looking, oh, hey, look at the signs, but they're not listening to what he said to do as a result of the signs.
Exactly. And in 3 Gospels, the 3 synoptic Gospels, he gives this dissertation of the end of the age, and they're all pretty much the same. But one thing I think that people just sort of pull out that passage or those passages and say, wow, this is going to be horrible, and miss kind of the bigger conversation that he's having with his disciples there. on the side of that hill, because it goes on. He tells some parables. He tells, and then he commissions them in the midst of it. And if you look at it, first of all, in the actual Matthew 24, it talks about that there's going to be great deception, and that there's going to be these antichrists rising up, not the Antichrist, but Antichrist. There's spirit of the Antichrist in politics and leaders. There's going to be an increase in violence. There's going to be a worldwide division and fragmentation. There will be a major breakdown of social norms, and you can see that even more so. Paul says that in 2 Timothy 3. There's going to be environmental crisis that will cause famines and drought, and there'll be natural disasters, an increase of earthquakes. Many will fall away from the faith due to the pressures of it all, and Christians will turn on one another, which is all scary, really, you know.
Especially the part about Christians turning on one another, because I really feel it in the environment today, especially if you look at social media. Yeah. It's really scary to see Christians turning on one another like I've never seen before. But you brought up an interesting point, and I wanted to ask you a question about it, and it was about the Antichrist. And, I've always kind of wondered about that, because I always wondered to myself, how is that going to really happen? Because, I was thinking like a Jim Jones type of a character or somebody like that.
And why do people follow? How would you know? I think the question I always ask myself is how would I know one when I saw one?
Yeah,
and
right.
I think it's a simple answer, and that is that we know John says in 1 John, God is love, and then Paul defines love, and if God is love, and we have a description of love, then everything opposite of that, because the description of love is Christ-likeness. So the opposite of that would be Antichrist.
The Antichrist, yeah.
And so when in 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrong. It does not delight in evil. It rejoices in the truth, which we've talked about already. And it always hopes, and it always brings hope, And that's the Spirit of God. That's Christ's likeness, and we're called to that, But if there is an anti-Christ-like spirit, you would just take and reverse that list, which I've done just to have a look at it. And it's a scary list, because you can see it in the world today. And so I think not to see it there again. See, that's the journey back, is to go back to Scripture and say, Lord, help me see it, help me be aware. And in Matthew 24 and Matthew 25, but mainly in 24, Jesus constantly says, be alert, be aware, be on guard. He says that this is going to be like the day of Noah, when this all comes down, that people are going to be eating and sleeping and drinking and marrying and making merry. They're going to just be carrying on their lives, and then boom, it's over, and it's like people, they weren't aware, and they didn't see it coming. So
I even think that it goes beyond just even looking for, characteristics in, perhaps political or religious leaders, but it really goes to how are we in our own lives. And I really saw it really strong over this last year, because in social media, we've never had an opportunity like we've had now to actually have a dialogue with people, that you didn't have to be face to face with them, and you could just say what you wanted. Or some people did. I didn't quite go there, just because, if I said I loved my grandmother on social media, people come out against you, no matter what you say. But I just saw a lot of anti-Christ-like behaviors out there from people, Christians toward one another. And that really indicated to me that the church had lost its, not the whole church, I'm not saying this, it wasn't everybody, but a lot of, Christians that I had grown up with and have known for a long time, had allowed themselves to drift away just in their treatment toward one another, drift away from just basic Christ-likeness. And it was kind of spooky.
You know, as you look at the passage and carry it on into Matthew 25, I think the key to all of this is this: is like, first of all, he gives 3 parables in a row. One is the one about the bridesmaids with their lamps, like, be aware, be on time, don't miss it, kind of a thing. But and I think that's a spiritual preparedness as much as anything. But the other 2 are about stewardship. One is, a landowner leaves his estate to the steward, goes away and comes back unannounced. And he had been mean and unjust to his workers, and he gets judged on that. And the other one is the parable of the talents, where the master gives 3 different servants different amounts of talents or money, but I think of it as talent, Right. And then it comes back and judges on how they spent it. Now, it's like you've been given this life, and you've been given this giftedness in your life. You've been really given a call on your life, which I think is something I want to talk about in future podcasts. But how well did you spend your life? Did you spend it for the kingdom? Did you just give yourself to the kingdom, And then he goes through that Matthew 25 is the division of the sheep and goats and the judgment.
I want to ask you about that because, for years, that's always been a passage that's always been a little bit disturbing to me, just because, in modern day evangelical Christianity, we are really, it is salvation through grace and not of works. And that's very clear in the writings of Paul and all through the New Testament. But then when you get to the story of the sheep and the goats, and that's the words of Jesus, it doesn't contradict that. It just makes you think that there's, more there.
Well, in order for us to carry on with this list, because the list was, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. And I was a stranger or an alien or an immigrant. You welcomed me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison. So these are all issues of compassion, justice, and mercy. But as you did it to the least of these, you did it unto me, Jesus said. No, unto Jesus. Yeah. So it's literally a form of worshiping the Lord is to serve him in this way in a broken world. And I think the big picture of all of this is, okay, who am I? What have I been given? And how should I spend my life? Therefore, how should I live? If all of this is true. And, we couldn't even do it without the grace and faith.
True. One thing that really troubles me, and I think the reason we're even having this podcast is because all of those things that you mentioned, they all kind of lean toward this social justice thing, and those seem to be real hot buttons in Christianity and among Christians, and they've a lot of it's gotten political. A lot of Christians feel that politics has tried to own some of these issues as for political gain and hijack them. Both parties have been guilty of doing that. So where do you stand on that? I mean, how do Christians then plug in? How do they start to get through that political haze and the political glasses that they're looking at things through?
Well, yeah, and therefore, you have to go back and look at it from a biblical perspective and not a political perspective. You said it last week. We got to lay down our politics and all this stuff and get back to the truth of the word. I would say that if there was an enemy that wanted to destroy the work of God, wouldn't it stand to reason that he would put a stigma on the work of God and call it names? Socialism, social justice, liberalism. It stands to reason that that's something that I think the enemy would do to tear the church apart so it wouldn't fulfill the commission. So when you talk about this stuff, and it smacks of, from a political lens, of socialism, people just push back, especially conservative people push back on it. And we should be on the front lines of it.
Okay, so explain that a little bit, because people are going to hear that and they're going to ask themselves, is Tri a socialist?
I would ask myself, is Jesus a socialist? I mean, maybe
okay.
No, I mean, it's...
You're on your own there.
No, yeah, but I'm just saying that caring for the broken, poor world is a Christian thing to do.
I know,
say that
but
with my tongue in my cheek,
agree.
and I know, but
I know. I agree with you, but I have a problem with that in the fact that political parties then have taken that and used it for political gain.
Okay.
And therefore, I'm not necessarily believing that, socialism and the more liberal side of things are coming at it from an honest place of really wanting to help people. That's where I'm getting to.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that frustrates me about
Well,
some of these discussions is because, political gain has hijacked some of these really important
okay. Well,
things.
first of all, social justice is not socialism. Socialism is a governmental control thing. Social justice.
Yeah.
God is a God of justice, and he
Okay.
wants justice for people, for society.
Right. So I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm so glad you clarified that, because it's tough to, as a believer, it's tough to work through this stuff. And I'm talking, on behalf of a lot of Christians out there who are struggling every day because they're, they want to help the poor, but they get labeled. There's just a lot of fear and confusion.
Well, and I think that why we're talking about this today is because we're trying to take a journey back to the scripture itself and away from all of that political lens and all that chatter and talk, and get back to the heart of God, in these matters. Honestly, Ruben, I know you know it as I do, that the success of the church really is that we would become the agency for the poor.
Absolutely.
That's why we have a 501c3. That's why we're nonprofit, because
know.
we're supposed to be caring for the communities and societies that we're in, even in the world. We're called.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Tri. One thing that I have learned in my life, and if there's one lesson that I took from you and from Brent Rue in all my years, is the belief in the church, that the church was the answer to the cares of the world. And it has to happen there. But unfortunately, the church has, gotten political.
Well, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Yes.
We're trying to pull ourselves and others back with us to the truth that's in the Word and the heart of God and the commission of God, and that we would become the church again.
Yeah. I really believe that too. Now, in that last passage where Jesus talks about the sheep and the goats, if there's anything that resonates to you in that mostly, he talks about a number of different things. He talks about being hungry, thirsty, a stranger, naked, sick, a prisoner. Is there anything that stands out to you as something that's closer to your heart than any of the things that he lists?
I think we need to just do it all, and obviously the body of Christ has many parts, so we all need to work together and get it done, because it's not going to get better. I don't think. I think there's going to be a greater demand for authentic Christianity than ever before in these years to come.
That is so true. Well, thank you, Tri, and thank you everyone for joining us. Until next week, we just leave you now with this passage to go ahead and just meditate on yourself. Have a great day.
At the end of the 25th chapter of Matthew, Jesus said, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They will also answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you? He will reply, Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Funding for the Journey Back is made possible by viewers like you. Please visit patreon.com/thejourneyback to learn more about supporting this podcast.